My daughter lied about ruining the irreplaceable wedding dress, then admitted she did it out of spite. Her punishment cost her $17,000 and her freedom. My ex-partner, Emily, who is 31, and I, David, 32, became parents to our daughter Maya, now 16, when we were quite young ourselves. We ended things romantically years ago, but managed to build a functional co-parenting relationship. We share custody and make sure Maya knows we are a team when it comes to her upbringing. One rule we established early on, and have stuck to firmly, is straightforward. If Maya breaks something that belongs to someone else, she is responsible for the cost of replacing or repairing it. We learned this lesson the hard way after a particularly boisterous indoor game involving a soccer ball resulted in a shattered antique lamp belonging to Emily's mother when Maya was 8. Maya spent her summer doing extra chores for neighbors to earn the money to pay her grandmother back. It took weeks, but she did it, and we hope the principle stuck. My side of the family is relatively small. It was just my younger sister Jessica, who is 27, and me as the grandchildren. Our parents, Pop George and Nana Helen, ran a bespoke tailoring and alterations shop for nearly 40 years. It was a fixture in our town. They specialized in custom garments, intricate repairs, and handling delicate vintage fabrics. Nana Helen, especially, had a reputation for being able to work magic with a needle and thread. She could look at a picture in a magazine and replicate the garment perfectly, often improving the fit or construction. My Aunt Carol, Nana Helen's sister, never married or had children. She started working in the shop straight out of high school and became Nana Helen's right hand. When Pop George and Nana Helen decided to retire about 5 years ago, Aunt Carol took over the business, keeping the name and the tradition alive. Last year brought some exciting news. Jessica's girlfriend, Olivia, who is 29, proposed. They'd been together since college, and everyone was thrilled for them. They started planning a wedding for the following autumn. Pop George, who still dabbled in tailoring for special projects, immediately offered to create a custom suit for Olivia. She was ecstatic. Pop George's suits were legendary among the older generation in town for their impeccable cut and quality. She spent several afternoons at his workshop, getting measured and looking at fabric swatches. Around the same time, Nana Helen pulled me aside. She had an idea, but it needed to be a complete secret, especially from Jessica. She asked me to casually bring up wedding dresses with Jessica, find out what her absolute dream dress would look like, and report back, maybe even sketch it if I could. Nana Helen knew Jessica would likely brush off any direct questions or downplay her desires, thinking anything truly special was out of reach financially. So, a few days later, while Jessica and I were grabbing coffee, I steered the conversation toward the wedding plans. I asked her, just hypothetically, what kind of dress she'd choose if money were no object. Thinking it was just sibling banter, Jessica let her guard down. She described this beautiful, intricate gown she'd seen in a high-fashion magazine, detailed lace, a specific cut, delicate beadwork. She sighed as she described it, adding that it was wildly impractical and cost a fortune, so she was looking at simple, off-the-rack options instead. I made mental notes and later sketched out the key features she'd mentioned, relaying everything back to Nana Helen. Nana Helen then spent the next 4 months dedicating almost every spare moment to Jessica's dress. She sourced fabrics that were incredibly similar, high-quality silks and French lace, costing a small fortune themselves. Aunt Carol told me later that Nana Helen often worked late into the night in her home studio, meticulously hand-stitching the delicate lace appliques and sewing thousands of tiny seed pearls onto the bodice and skirt. She consulted her old pattern books and used techniques Aunt Carol hadn't even seen before. It was a labor of love, poured into what she knew would likely be the only wedding dress she'd make for a grandchild, given it was just Jessica and me. The reveal happened at a family dinner a few months before the wedding was initially planned. After dessert, Nana Helen asked Jessica to close her eyes. Pop George and I brought out a garment bag. When Jessica opened her eyes and Nana Helen unzipped the bag, Jessica gasped. It was the dress she had described, brought to life. It shimmered under the dining room lights. Nana Helen urged her to try it on. Jessica disappeared into a bedroom and came back out wearing it. The fit was perfect, as if Nana Helen had taken measurements in secret. Jessica slowly turned, running her hands over the silk and lace. Tears welled up in her eyes. Emily, who was there with Maya, had tears too. Even Pop George cleared his throat and looked away for a moment. It was an incredible gift, embodying Nana Helen's skill and affection. Life took a difficult turn a few months after that. Nana Helen fell ill quite suddenly. It was aggressive and she passed away just 6 weeks later. The loss hit everyone hard. The shop felt empty, even with Aunt Carol there. Family gatherings were subdued. Pop George spent a lot of time quietly organizing Nana Helen's sewing room. Jessica was particularly affected. She and Nana Helen had always been close, sharing a love for fabrics and design. The wedding planning came to a halt. After some time, Jessica decided she still wanted to wear the dress. She told Olivia that wearing it would feel like Nana Helen was still part of the day, a tangible piece of her presence. That brings us to the incident 3 days ago. With the wedding rescheduled for later this year, things were slowly moving forward again. Knowing Jessica was still struggling with Nana's absence, I suggested Maya and I pay her a visit, just to hang out and offer some company. Emily agreed it was a good idea. We drove over to Jessica's apartment on Saturday afternoon. We chatted for a while, looked at some potential flower arrangements Olivia had bookmarked, and generally tried to keep things light. Jessica seemed better than she had been in weeks. At one point, Maya wandered into Jessica's spare room, where where the wedding dress was carefully stored in its garment bag, hanging on a sturdy hook. Maya came back into the living room and asked Jessica if she could try the dress on. Jessica paused, then politely but firmly told her no, explaining it was incredibly delicate and had been made exactly for her size. Maya pulled a face for a second but didn't argue, seemingly dropping the subject. A little later, we decided to order takeout for dinner. The restaurant wasn't far, but they didn't deliver. Jessica and I volunteered to go pick it up. Maya said she'd rather stay behind, mentioning she wanted to play with Jessica's small dog Buster and maybe finish some homework she'd brought. It seemed reasonable enough. She was 16, responsible enough to be left alone for 30 minutes. We were gone for maybe 40 minutes tops. When we got back to the apartment building, I noticed Jessica's front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, calling Jessica's name. There was no answer from the living room. We walked further in. The door to the spare room was wide open. And then we saw it. The beautiful dress, Nana Helen's final masterpiece, was lying in a heap on the floor. It wasn't just wrinkled, it was mangled. The garment bag was torn open. Long, jagged cuts sliced through the bodice and skirt. Delicate lace was ripped away, beads scattered across the carpet like tiny lost tears. Several seams were violently split open. Maya was standing near the wreckage, holding a pair of fabric shears, her face streaked with tears. Buster the dog was cowering under a chair. Jessica made a small noise and sank onto the edge of the spare bed, her hands covering her mouth. She stared at the ruined dress, her face completely white. She didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. Then, very quietly, she asked us to leave. Her voice was flat. I took Maya by the arm and led her out of the apartment. Once in the car, I told her she was grounded indefinitely. No phone, no laptop except for schoolwork under supervision, no going out with friends. When we got back to my place, I took pictures of the dress from every angle Jessica had sent me in a distraught text moments after we left. I forwarded them to Aunt Carol, asking if there was any conceivable way to salvage it. Aunt Carol called me back within the hour. Her voice was strained. She said there was no chance. The cuts were too deep, too random, right through the most intricate parts of the handwork and expensive fabric. It wasn't like a popped seam or a small tear that could be invisibly mended. It was butchered. She explained that, based on the materials Nana Helen had sourced, and the sheer hours involved, she estimated Nana Helen must have spent close to 500 hours on it. The dress's replacement cost would be significant. Given the unique fabrics, the hand-sewn beadwork, and the complexity Nana Helen had put into it, she estimated the cost to recreate it as closely as possible would be around $14,000. Even then, it wouldn't be Nana Helen's dress. Maya has about $17,000 saved up. She's worked part-time jobs since she was 14, babysitting, helping at the local library, tutoring younger kids. She also won a couple of regional writing competitions with decent cash prizes. This money was earmarked for college-related expenses, not tuition itself. Emily and I have separate savings plans for that. But for things like books, supplies, maybe a semester abroad, dorm room setup, general living costs, the extras that make college life easier. Remembering our long-standing rule, I knew what needed to happen. The next morning, I took Maya to the bank. As she is still a minor, I have access and control over her account. I initiated a transfer. $14,000 would go directly to Aunt Carol to cover the cost of materials and labor for recreating the dress as best as possible. The remaining $3,000 would go to Jessica, explicitly designated as compensation for the emotional distress and the destruction of an irreplaceable heirloom. Throughout the bank visit and the drive home, Maya was sobbing. She kept asking what she was supposed to do now for all the college things she'd been saving for. She insisted it wasn't entirely her fault, that she panicked when the seams ripped and she couldn't get it off. I told her the initial ripped seams might have been fixable, though she still would have been punished severely for disobeying Jessica and trying it on in the first place, especially knowing how delicate it was and that it clearly wouldn't fit her. Maya has a much larger frame than Jessica, whose health issues keep her very slender. I pointed out that trying on the dress after being explicitly told no was the first mistake. The second, and far more destructive one, was taking scissors to it instead of waiting the 15 minutes for us to return and help her. Panic didn't explain hacking it to pieces. I also reminded her that finding money for college extras could involve getting a part-time job during her studies, applying for more scholarships, or budgeting carefully. Consequences of her actions. Maya immediately called Emily when we got home. Emily called me shortly after. She had heard Maya's tearful, panicked version first. Emily agreed Maya was completely in the wrong for trying on the dress, and especially for cutting it. She understood the need for consequences. However, she questioned the severity of taking almost all of Maya's savings, arguing that I was potentially ruining her future over a dress that was, technically, a gift and therefore free. I reminded Emily of our rule, the one we both agreed on and enforced after the lamp incident years ago. Break it, you buy it. The cost this time was just devastatingly high. Emily acknowledged the rule but still expressed discomfort with the amount, suggesting it was disproportionate. We ended the call with the issue unresolved between us. Update 1. The conversation with Emily continued over text later that day. I reiterated the details Aunt Carol had given me about the cost and the sheer amount of work Nana Helen had put in. Still unconvinced about the extent of the damage based solely on Maya's description, Emily asked to see the photos I had taken. I sent them. The silence on her end lasted for about 20 minutes. Then she called back. Her tone was completely different. She said the pictures were far worse than she had imagined, that hacked apart was an accurate description, not just a few torn seams. Seeing the visual evidence seemed to shift her perspective entirely. She now agreed that the consequence, while harsh, matched the severity of the action, especially given the irreplaceable sentimental value tied to Nana Helen. Emily told me she had spent most of the afternoon talking with Maya, pushing past the initial "I panicked" explanation. She said Maya was resistant at first, sticking to the story of getting stuck. But Emily kept asking why. Why try it on when told no? Why cut it instead of waiting? Eventually, Maya broke down and told Emily the real reason. She confessed she hadn't just panicked. She had tried the dress on, felt the seams pop almost immediately because it was far too small, and managed to wriggle out of it with only minor damage. But then, standing there looking at the beautiful dress, Nana Helen's dress made for Jessica, she felt a surge of anger and resentment. She told Emily it wasn't fair that Jessica got this incredible custom-made reminder of Nana Helen, while Maya felt she got nothing comparable, despite inheriting several pieces of Nana's jewelry and some cherished books after the funeral. In that moment of jealousy and anger, Maya picked up the fabric shears Jessica kept in the sewing basket in that room and deliberately cut the dress apart. Her reported words to Emily were chilling. "If I couldn't have a dress from Nana, nobody could." Hearing this, that the destruction was intentional and motivated by jealousy, changed everything. It wasn't a panicked mistake, it was a calculated act of cruelty aimed at Jessica. Emily was shaken. She told me this wasn't the daughter they had raised. We agreed immediately that Maya needed professional help to understand and address the root of this behavior. Emily started researching therapists that evening, looking at local child psychologists and counselors, though many had waiting lists, and also exploring reputable online therapy platforms specializing in adolescence as a potential starting point. The punishment, the financial restitution, and the grounding stands. If anything, knowing the malicious intent solidified our decision. We also agreed therapy was now non-negotiable. I also spoke with Olivia, Jessica's fiancée. I explained the situation, the confirmation of the cost from Aunt Carol, and the action taken regarding Maya's savings. I also relayed Maya's confession about the deliberate nature of the act. Olivia was quiet for a moment, then thanked me for handling it directly and decisively. She said Jessica wasn't doing well. The shock and distress had triggered a severe flare-up of her ulcerative colitis, a chronic condition similar to Crohn's, often exacerbated by stress. Jessica was currently confined to bed, quite ill, and Olivia was worried she might end up needing hospital treatment if it didn't subside soon. Olivia said she would take the remains of the dress over to Aunt Carol early next week, as Carol needed to examine even the scraps to figure out exactly how Nana Helen constructed certain parts, and to confirm fabric types and beadwork details for the reconstruction attempt. Olivia asked for some space for Jessica for a while, needing time to physically recover and emotionally process everything. She understood we were addressing it with Maya, but emphasized Jessica needed peace. Regarding the $3,000 earmarked for Jessica, Emily and I discussed the new information. We decided its fate would depend on Jessica's health and Maya's progress. If Jessica's illness worsened to the point of hospitalization due to the stress Maya caused, that $3,000 would be used towards any uncovered medical expenses. If Jessica recovered without needing the hospital, we would hold on to the money for now. Its potential return to Maya would be conditional on her actively participating in therapy, demonstrating genuine remorse through changed behavior, and making sincere efforts to make amends over time, months down the line at least. Aunt Carol has begun the painstaking process of trying to recreate the dress. She's sorting through Nana Helen's extensive collection of notes, sketches, and fabric samples, trying to match everything precisely. She mentioned finding some preliminary sketches Nana Helen had made that corresponded with my initial description, which was a small relief. She's also carefully examining the damaged dress fragments Olivia dropped off, looking at stitch types and construction methods. She warned it will be a long process, as Nana Helen had techniques honed over 60 years that even Carol is unfamiliar with. Update 2. It's been a few weeks since the incident. The initial grounding terms have been fully implemented and enforced consistently at both my house and Emily's. Maya's routine is now strictly controlled. She goes to school, comes home, does her homework in the living room under supervision, and that's essentially it. Her smartphone was confiscated, replaced by a basic flip phone that can only call Emily, me, and 911. The SIM card from her smartphone is locked away. Her laptop access is restricted to school-related websites and platforms, with strict time limits managed through parental control software Emily installed. There are no visits with friends, no going out unsupervised, no access to streaming services or television beyond family movie nights, if earned through consistent compliance, and certainly no driving privileges. Her learner's permit is locked away. We also had to follow through on rescinding a privilege she had recently earned. Just before all this happened, Maya had completed a challenging coding project for a school competition, placing second. As a reward, Emily and I had agreed she could finally get the dog she'd been asking for, a rescue beagle mix from the local shelter we'd already visited. After she destroyed the dress, especially learning she did it deliberately, we told her the dog was off the table. Our reasoning was clear. Her actions demonstrated a profound lack of trustworthiness and impulse control. If she could destroy something so valuable and meaningful out of anger when left alone, we couldn't be sure she wouldn't neglect or potentially harm an animal if left unsupervised, or if she had another moment of uncontrolled emotion. She protested this, but Emily and I were united. Trust needs to be rebuilt from the ground up before such a responsibility can be considered again. Emily had even initially suggested removing Maya's bedroom door, but I persuaded her against that. Maya needs a space to sleep privately, even if her waking hours outside of school are confined to common areas. The 6-month duration of these restrictions remains firm. Both Emily and I are committed to enforcing it consistently across both households. Maya understands that any attempt to circumvent the rules, like trying to use a friend's phone or creating secret social media accounts, will result in the grounding period being extended. Her reaction has been mostly sullen compliance. There are occasional tears or arguments, usually when a restriction prevents her from doing something her friends are doing, but she hasn't actively defied the core rules yet. We found a therapist who works with adolescents and offers secure video sessions, bypassing the local waitlist issues. Maya had her first session last week. Emily and I joined for the first part to explain the situation from our perspective, then Maya met with the therapist alone. It's obviously too early to see significant changes, but the process has begun. The therapist wants to see Maya weekly for the foreseeable future. Aunt Carol has made some progress on the dress reconstruction. She managed to identify the specific silk supplier Nana Helen used, though one of the lace patterns seems to be discontinued. She's searching vintage suppliers and online marketplaces for a close match or enough yardage of the original if possible. She did manage to carefully remove a small panel of the least damaged beadwork from the original dress, hoping she might be able to incorporate that tiny piece of Nana Helen's actual handiwork into the new gown, perhaps sewn inside the lining or near the hem, as a hidden tribute. It's a slow, meticulous process. She estimates it will still take several months to complete, assuming she can source all the materials. Jessica is slowly recovering physically from the ulcerative colitis flare-up. Olivia reported that she is out of bed more often but still tires easily and needs to manage her stress levels carefully. She avoided hospitalization, which was a relief. Because of this, the $3,000 remains set aside, its fate still tied to Maya's progress in therapy and her demonstrated efforts towards making amends, which haven't truly begun yet beyond basic compliance with her punishment. Jessica is still not ready to see or speak with Maya, and we are respecting her need for space. Olivia acts as the intermediary, providing brief updates on Jessica's health and conveying necessary information about the dress reconstruction to Aunt Carol. Update 3. It's now been roughly 2 months since Maya destroyed the dress. Life has settled into a tense, monotonous rhythm, dictated by the terms of her grounding and the ongoing emotional fallout. Maya continues her weekly video therapy sessions. Emily and I have joint check-ins with the therapist every few weeks. The feedback remains consistent. Maya participates in the sessions, answers direct questions, but remains emotionally guarded. The therapist mentioned Maya often describes events in a passive voice, minimizing her own agency, particularly concerning the dress incident. When discussing Nana Helen, Maya reportedly expresses missing her, but discussions about Jessica or the dress itself often lead to deflection or long silences. The therapist noted Maya hasn't yet articulated a clear understanding of why her actions were so damaging beyond the obvious physical destruction. The grasp of the sentimental significance, the violation of trust, and the targeted nature of the act seems superficial, often framed as getting caught or getting in trouble, rather than genuine accountability for the hurt caused. The therapist recommended patience, stating that breakthroughs, if they happen, can't be forced. At home, the atmosphere is quiet. Maya adheres to the strict schedule: school, supervised homework in the dining room, basic chores, setting the table, loading the dishwasher, keeping her room tidy, checked daily by me or Emily when she's at her house, dinner, then perhaps reading a school-assigned book or working on homework again until bedtime. She doesn't argue about the rules anymore. It's more of a resigned, almost mechanical compliance. There's no laughter, no spontaneous chatter about her day unless prompted, and even then, answers are brief. The sullenness I mentioned before hasn't dissipated. It's settled into a quiet withdrawal. For example, last week I tried to initiate a conversation about a book she was reading for English class, one I remembered enjoying in high school. She just shrugged, said it's okay, and turned back to the page, effectively shutting down the interaction. This kind of passive resistance is common. She does what she is told, but offers nothing more. The incident with the dog adoption flyer happened about 2 weeks ago. She saw it pinned to the community board at the library, where she was picking up some reserved school texts. I waited outside. When she got back in the car, she held the flyer and just stared at it for a long time. Then she quietly asked if maybe, just maybe, since she hadn't broken any rules, we could reconsider the dog. I looked over at her. I kept my voice even and told her, Maya, the dog wasn't just about following rules. It was about trust and responsibility. What you did with the dress showed a serious lack of judgment and control when you were upset. An animal depends on you completely. We can't revisit getting a dog until we see consistent evidence, over a much longer time, that you can handle responsibility and manage your emotions constructively, especially when things don't go your way. That trust needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. She didn't argue, just crumpled the flyer slowly in her hand and looked out the window for the rest of the drive home. The silence felt heavy. There was also a near encounter last weekend. Emily had taken Maya grocery shopping, one of the few approved outings, always supervised. As they were heading to the checkout, Olivia, Jessica's fiancée, walked into the same aisle from the other end. Emily said Maya saw her, froze for a second, then physically ducked behind a large display of paper towels, avoiding eye contact entirely. Olivia didn't appear to notice them. Emily didn't force an interaction, but she told me Maya was visibly tense and silent for the rest of the shopping trip and the car ride back. It was a clear indication that Maya is aware of the social ramifications among the family, even if she's not ready to confront them. On the dress front, Aunt Carol is facing real challenges. The lace issue is proving significant. She spent weeks contacting suppliers across the US and even in Europe. She ordered samples of several potential replacements, showing them to me when I stopped by the shop. None had the same delicate weave or the specific floral motif of Nana Helen's choice. One was too coarse, another too modern-looking. Carol laid the salvaged fragment of the original lace next to the samples, and the difference in quality and character was stark. She's now discussing options with Jessica, via Olivia. They might have to choose a different, high-quality lace that complements the silk, accepting that an exact replication is impossible. Carol described this as making a cousin, not a twin, of Nana's dress. She did, however, perfectly match the specific shade of ivory silk and the fine thread Nana Helen preferred. She showed me the small, carefully cleaned panel of original beadwork she plans to incorporate. Holding that tiny piece, seeing the minuscule, perfect stitches Nana Helen made, underscored the magnitude of what was lost. Carol is meticulously documenting every step, creating new patterns based on Nana's notes and the dress fragments. But progress is slower than anticipated due to the material sourcing difficulties. Jessica is doing better physically. Olivia sent me a brief text saying Jessica has returned to work full-time and is managing her health carefully. She is still keeping her distance from Maya and hasn't asked about her or the situation directly. The message is clear. She needs more time. The wedding plans are inching forward, but Olivia mentioned Jessica's enthusiasm waxes and wanes. Some days she's focused on vendor contracts. Other days, the subject is clearly painful. The $3,000 remains untouched, pending significant changes in Maya's therapeutic progress and accountability. Right now, based on the therapist's feedback and our own observations, we are nowhere near considering its return. Update 4. About 3 weeks ago, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Pop George called me. He asked if it would be all right to stop by. He didn't say why, but I had a feeling it was about Maya. He hadn't really intervened directly since Nana Helen passed, mostly keeping his grief private, focusing on his workshop and quiet routines. He arrived about an hour later. He looked older than he had a few months ago. His usual workshop energy seemed dimmed. Maya was at the dining room table, ostensibly working on a history paper. The usual quiet of the house felt amplified by Pop George's presence. He greeted me softly, then walked over to the dining table. Maya looked up, startled. "Hello, Maya," Pop George said, his voice gentle. He pulled out a chair and sat down opposite her. He didn't immediately launch into anything heavy. Instead, he started talking about Nana Helen, but not about her death. He talked about her hands. He described how they were never still, always sketching, pinning, stitching. He recalled a time when Jessica was small, maybe 6 or 7, and desperately wanted a specific doll dress she saw in a catalog. It was too expensive. Nana Helen stayed up late for 2 nights, drafting a pattern from the tiny catalog picture and sewing a perfect miniature version, complete with tiny buttons. He remembered Nana Helen teaching Jessica her first basic stitches, how patient she was. He spoke about the shop, the scent of fabric bolts and steam from the iron, the rhythm of the old sewing machines. Maya listened, mostly looking down at her textbook, occasionally flicking her eyes up at Pop George. She didn't say anything, just picked at the edge of a page. Then, Pop George shifted slightly in his chair. "That dress, Maya," he said, his voice still quiet but carrying weight. "Your Nana poured herself into that dress. It wasn't just fabric and thread, it was. Well, it was her way of being there. At the wedding, you know? Her hands made that. Hours and hours. Thinking about Jessica, thinking about the day." He paused, looking directly at Maya. "She told me once while she was working on it that she hoped it would be something Jessica could keep forever. Maybe even pass down one day. An heirloom." Maya visibly flinched at the word heirloom. She hunched her shoulders slightly. Pop George continued. "I saw the pictures, Maya. What happened?" It wasn't an accusation, just a question hanging in the air. Maya mumbled something incoherent, her eyes fixed on the table. "Why?" Pop George asked simply. "Why did you cut it?" Maya shook her head slightly, still not looking up. "I don't know," she whispered, barely audible. "You don't know?" Pop George repeated. Not unkindly, but with a note of gentle persistence. "Was it an accident? Did you trip?" "No," Maya mumbled. "The seams, I panicked." It was the same fragmented explanation she initially gave us. Pop George was silent for a moment. He reached out, not to touch her, but just rested his hand flat on the table near her textbook. "Panic doesn't usually involve finding scissors, Maya. Cutting something takes time. It takes effort." He sighed softly. "Did you think about Nana Helen when you did it? Did you think about Jessica?" Maya pressed her lips together tightly and refused to answer, pointedly turning a page in her book, even though she clearly wasn't reading. Pop George watched her for another minute. The silence stretched. Then, he slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He looked from Maya back to me, standing by the doorway. He gave a small, weary nod. "All right," he said softly. He walked back towards the door. As he was leaving, he put a hand briefly on my shoulder. "She's got a hard road ahead, David. We all do, I suppose." Then he left. After the front door closed, Maya remained frozen at the table for several minutes. Then she abruptly gathered her books, stood up without a word, and went to her room. She stayed there until I called her for dinner. She didn't mention Pop George's visit, and her demeanor, if anything, seemed even more withdrawn and unreadable that evening. There was no visible crack in her facade, no indication that his words had prompted any reflection, at least none that she showed outwardly. His visit hadn't produced a breakthrough, but it felt like another necessary layer of confronting the reality of her actions, delivered not with anger, but with the quiet weight of shared family history and loss. Emily and I discussed Pop George's visit later that night. We both agreed it was a significant gesture on his part, trying to connect with Maya through shared memory and quiet questioning. We were both sobered by his assessment. A hard road ahead. It echoed the therapist's calls for patience, but also highlighted the depth of the repair needed, not just for the dress, but for the trust and relationships within the family. The path forward remains unchanged: continued therapy, maintained consequences, and waiting for Maya to choose accountability.